It is the summer of 1920. On School Street in Boston, a line of people stretches around the block. They have been standing there since before dawn. Some of them have brought their children. Some have brought their life savings in cash, stuffed into envelopes, folded into coat pockets, carried in the kind of careful way that people carry things they cannot afford to lose. They are waiters and factory workers and small businessmen and housewives and recent immigrants and retired school teachers. They are here to give their money to Charles Ponzi. Ponzi's office, the Securities Exchange Company, is taking in on busy days over $200,000 in 1920 dollars from people who have heard that this man has discovered a way to double your money in 90 days. Some of them have already done it. They came before, invested, waited 90 days, and received exactly what they were promised. They are back to invest more. They have no way of knowing that the money they are receiving is not profit. It is someone else's principal. The Ponzi scheme is the most replicated financial fraud in human history. It has been run in every country, in every era, at every scale, from village savings clubs in rural Africa to Bernie Madoff's $50 billion operation in Manhattan. It has destroyed families, wiped out retirement accounts, bankrupted pension funds, and created a specific category of human suffering that repeats itself with a regularity that should, by now, be preventable but never quite is. What almost no one knows about Charles Ponzi is that he started with something real, that the opportunity he identified was genuine, that the fraud did not begin with a plan to steal but with a discovery, and that the moment it became fraud was not the beginning of the story but a turning point somewhere in the middle, when the math stopped working and Ponzi made a decision that he could not take back. That decision destroyed 40,000 people and created a template that is still running today. Charles Ponzi was born in Lugo, Italy, in 1882. He arrived in the United States in 1903 with $2.50 in his pocket, the rest of the money his family had given him for the crossing having been lost at the card tables on the ship. He arrived in America planning to be rich. He arrived broke, and the distance between those two facts was the engine of everything that followed. The next 15 years were a study in failed ambition. He worked as a waiter. He was fired for shortchanging customers. He moved to Canada, where he worked as a teller at a bank that was itself running a fraud and watched it collapse. He forged a check and spent 3 years in a Canadian prison. He returned to the United States, became involved in a scheme to smuggle Italian immigrants across the border, and spent 2 more years in an Atlanta federal prison. He arrived in Boston in 1917 with a criminal record, no money, no connections, and no obvious path to the wealth he had been imagining since he stepped off the boat in 1903. He was 35 years old. In 1919, working as a small-time trader and import-export agent, Ponzi received a letter from a Spanish business contact that included an international reply coupon, a small paper token that could be purchased in one country and redeemed in another for the local equivalent of return postage. Ponzi looked at the coupon. He looked at the exchange rates, and he saw something. The First World War had left European currencies severely devalued against the American dollar. A postal reply coupon purchased in Italy for the equivalent of 1 cent could be redeemed in the United States for 6 cents. The arbitrage was real. On paper, the profit margins were extraordinary, several 100%. Ponzi began borrowing money from friends and acquaintances to buy postal coupons in bulk in Europe, redeem them in the United States, and distribute the profits. His early investors made exactly the returns he promised. Word spread. More investors arrived. Ponzi opened an office. He hired staff. He registered a company. By early 1920, the Securities Exchange Company was the most talked about investment opportunity in Boston. And Ponzi had already realized that the scheme could not work at scale. The mathematics of the postal coupon arbitrage were impossible to sustain at the volumes Ponzi needed. For Ponzi's scheme to be legitimate, there would need to be 160 million postal reply coupons in circulation worldwide. The actual number in circulation was approximately 27,000. The scheme, taken to its logical conclusion, was physically impossible. Ponzi knew this. He kept taking money anyway. The rationalization was that he believed, or told himself he believed, that he would find another opportunity, that the postal coupon idea had proven the concept, that he was not stealing but borrowing time, borrowing credibility, borrowing other people's money in the confident expectation that the legitimate returns that would eventually pay everyone back were just around the corner. The corner never comes. Instead, the scheme grows. Because a Ponzi scheme has a structural imperative toward growth, the only way to pay existing investors is to bring in new ones, and the only way to bring in new investors is to maintain the appearance of returns that attract them. The scheme cannot shrink. Shrinkage means missed payments. Missed payments mean panic. Panic means collapse. It must grow or die. By the summer of 1920, Ponzi had taken in approximately $15 million from somewhere between 30 and 40,000 investors. The actual assets of the Securities Exchange Company amounted to a small fraction of that. The gap was unbridgeable. The Boston Post began investigating. A financial analyst named Clarence Barron pointed out publicly that for Ponzi's scheme to be legitimate, there would need to be 160 million postal reply coupons in circulation worldwide. The actual number was approximately 27,000. Ponzi gave interviews. He was charming, confident, and specific in his counterarguments. Some people believed him. Enough people did not. The run began in late July 1920. Investors who had read the newspaper coverage began appearing at the School Street office asking for their money back. Ponzi paid them. He gave interviews to the press in which he was photographed in his immaculate suit, radiating the untroubled confidence of a man who has nothing to hide. On August 2, 1920, the Post published a front-page story detailing Ponzi's criminal record. The run accelerated. The Massachusetts Bank Commissioner ordered an audit. The audit revealed what the mathematics had always implied, that the liabilities of the Securities Exchange Company exceeded its assets by an amount that made repayment impossible. On August 12, 1920, less than a year after Ponzi had opened his office, the Securities Exchange Company was placed in receivership. Ponzi was arrested on federal mail fraud charges. He eventually pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. The investors recovered, on average, approximately 30 cents on the dollar. Many recovered nothing. The factories and boarding houses and small shops of Boston's immigrant communities had been hollowed out. People who had invested their life savings had lost most or all of it. The retired school teacher who had invested her pension, the factory worker who had borrowed against his house, the recent immigrant who had sent money to relatives back in Italy to invest on his behalf. Ponzi served his time, was released, was arrested again on Massachusetts state charges, jumped bail, was recaptured in New Orleans, served additional time, was released again, and was finally deported to Italy in 1934. He spent his remaining years in South America, living in poverty, giving occasional interviews to journalists who tracked him down. He died in the charity ward of a hospital in Rio de Janeiro in 1949. His estate was valued at approximately $75. The name outlasted everything else. In 1960, a quiet, well-regarded Wall Street investment manager named Bernie Madoff began what would eventually become the largest Ponzi scheme in history. He ran it for approximately 48 years. He operated through multiple financial crises: the 1987 crash, the dot-com collapse, the post-September 11th downturn, maintaining consistent returns that his clients attributed to his sophisticated trading strategies. In reality, he was not trading at all. He was running the same scheme that Ponzi had run in Boston in 1919. The SEC received credible, detailed warnings about Madoff's operation as early as 1999, 9 years before the collapse. A financial analyst named Harry Markopolos submitted a report to the SEC titled "The World's Largest Hedge Fund is a Fraud," explaining in precise mathematical terms why Madoff's claimed returns were impossible. The SEC investigated and found nothing. It investigated again. It found nothing again. Madoff's scheme collapsed in December 2008, not because any regulator caught it, but because the 2008 financial crisis triggered enough investor redemptions that he could no longer sustain the inflow of new money needed to pay them. He turned himself in to his sons, who reported him to the authorities. The losses were estimated at $65 billion. Thousands of individuals, charities, pension funds, and endowments lost everything. Madoff died in federal prison in 2021 at the age of 82. Between Ponzi and Madoff, and in every year of the century between them, versions of the same scheme have been discovered, prosecuted, and mourned. They vary in their specifics. They are identical in their structure, and they are identical in the psychological mechanism they exploit: the human desire to believe that someone has found a special access to returns that the ordinary world does not provide. That desire is not stupidity, it is hope. The people who invested with Charles Ponzi in 1920 were not foolish. They were people living in circumstances of economic precarity who had been offered what looked like a genuine opportunity. They had seen other people take the opportunity and receive exactly what was promised. They made a rational calculation based on the evidence available to them. The evidence available to them had been manufactured. This is the cruelty at the center of the Ponzi scheme that makes it different from other forms of financial fraud. It does not simply take money. It takes the judgment of the people it steals from and turns it against them. The scheme is designed so that the evidence that looks most convincing, the early investors who genuinely received their returns, is itself a product of the fraud. The proof that it works is produced by the mechanism that is stealing from you. Charles Ponzi died with $75. His scheme died with Bernie Madoff in a federal prison in 2021, except that it did not die. It is running now. Somewhere in a city you have heard of, in an office that looks like a legitimate financial services company, someone is paying early investors with late investors' money and waiting for the corner that never comes. The name on the door is different. The scheme is the same.